All right, everybody. Well, let's go ahead and get started. We got a couple minutes past the hour here. Um, People are still forming in, but that's all right. They'll be able to review as we go forward here. So, welcome everybody. I appreciate you making time on your Saturday to attend this. I'm Paul Duncan. You can reach me by a number of ways. I generally am always good at responding to texts that come to my phone. Also, this GreekGodTrading@gmail.com is a great way to send me longer emails or questions that don't fit into a text. As many of you are aware, I have a Twitter account that I echo alerts and put postings in. And you can follow that at Twitter, at Greek God Trading. I also share out contents of a Dropbox. In there are alerts and different files and the newsletters and things like that. And if you're interested in receiving those and having access to that and not having to necessarily wait for me or go through me, you can just send me an email to this GreekGodTrading@gmail.com with Dropbox in the subject, and I'll provide that to you. I'll add you. You'll get an invite from Dropbox proper, the corporate folks, saying that you've been invited to a Dropbox. And then this year I'm going to be more active in my newsletters. And if you're interested in receiving a sample of what that is, go ahead and send me an email on newsletter. I have a Yahoo group. Many of you probably are here because of that. You can join that group. There's no charge, obviously. You don't have to be an AAII affiliate to join. To get there is SIPSIG _. It's hidden by this active link. So SIPSIG _ subscribe at Yahoo group. And I'll get a notification that you want to join, and again, we'll do that handshake. And then finally, I operate 2 blogs. I'm not as prolific in my writing as of late because of just my life schedule, but when things are relevant, I do post here. I'll be focusing more on Twitter and the newsletter than anything, but there's always good content in here. General disclaimers. You obviously, I say this all the time, but you're responsible for your decisions. I'm not. I really am not considering your personal situation. I am not a professional investment advisor. Anything I talk about, I have no idea of your background, your situation, your time horizon, your risk tolerance, and we're going to talk about risk today, so this is even more timely. When I do talk about past performance, obviously, no guarantee of what's going on in the future, although I will say this strategy, the CSP and CC strategy, are nice little revenue producers. You're not going to win the lottery with these things, but again, you're not going to lose a lottery amount either. Data accuracy, I can't guarantee it, although I do my absolute best to make sure everything is accurate. You obviously need to do your own diligence. I'm not liable for any errors or inaccuracies. I do want you to point them out if you see them so I can fix them. But at the end of the day, you are responsible for your world. 2019, I'm going to step up my focus on this whole cash secured put covered call approach. Understanding risk is what we're dealing with today. I think it's important. It's come up in a number of venues, forums. And I think just getting our heads around what are the risk elements, especially for the new folks, is pretty important. In March, it all begins with stock selection. Cash secured puts and covered call methodology, you've got to have quality stocks. You cannot do this with bottom fishing and poor earnings, poor revenues, things related to that. I'm a big advocate that you can only improve on what you measure. So bookkeeping is important, and in April I will dedicate why this matters and how you can use it to improve your overall performance, whether it's a CSP, CC strategy, or any other strategy. If you don't record what you do and know looking at your equity statement is not a good enough way to do this, you're not going to be able to get full gains out of what you're doing. You may know that something's not working, but you may not know why it's not working, and so it's really important to focus on that. In May, I want to focus on executing the trades. I have a number of alerts that are sent out. Many of you utilize those alerts, and I get feedback from you, and I appreciate that. How do you act on those alerts? What do they mean? What if you're a couple hours late after a Twitter alert comes in? Does that mean you've lost it? Can you chase the alerts and things like that? And the answer is yes, you certainly can. You just got to be smart about it. June and July, I'm going to really start focusing on the practical aspects of all of this. Not that May isn't practical. In fact, it's all practical. But June and July, managing the trade. So obviously you could be in a position and it plummets or it takes off. So this whole concept of rolling, and what does that mean? How do you do that? How do you minimize? How do you opportune roll to maximize your potential profits? All of that stuff. I've been spending a lot of time on analyzing my performance on rolling because it is my weakest spot. I'm getting a lot better, and I want to share that with you guys. And then obviously, what do you do when things work out well? July early assignment happens infrequently. Typically, the stocks I invest in are not early assignment. They aren't hugely volatile, and as a result, you don't normally find yourself in the money, deep in the money. And as a result of that, you typically don't get early assignment. But when it happens, what should you do? And actually, the answers are pretty easy. And that'll take us through the first half, 2/3 of the year. Dependent, I said ish on these because it's going to be dependent on schedule. As many of you know, I've got two boys who are very good divers, one in the college world circuit and the other one in the high school circuit. So depending on what their schedule is, I will be available and we'll do that. So before I go on, any questions, comments, thoughts, anything else that you guys would like to see? Go ahead and turn your mics on, and happy to hear what else you would like to see presented here as it relates to CCs and CSPs. Anything? Okay. So today's agenda, I'm looking at about an hour or so. I'm free in time. I don't have any hard stops. So depending on your level of questions and comments, happy to engage and go deeper if necessary. Review cash secured puts and covered calls. CSPs and CCs, and then really understanding risk with CSPs and CCs. Some of this for you, looking at the names that are on the list, some of you are very experienced, and profit and loss charts are going to be, a lot of this is going to be, a simple review. For some of you who are new, I know we got some questions that some of you are new to CSPs and CCs, and so I just want to make sure that we're all starting from the same foundational components. So profit and loss charts are really important because most books will start off with that, and I think they don't tell you the full story. And that leads us into risk and exposure and why that matters. And then how do you evaluate this risk or this exposure at a moment in time? Because it matters. And so we're going to get into that a little deeper so that you walk away and have a better appreciation for what that means. The level of knowledge, today I'll use terms, short put, cash secured put, short call, covered call, long stock, OE, option expiration. If these terms are new to you, then you're welcome to be here, of course. I ask that you do a little bit of book work on your own, but also, if something's not clear, stop me, turn your mics on, and let me know. You also have a chat window available to you. You can also post things in your chat window, and I urge you to do that. I'll periodically look over at the chat window and see if I can address your questions as they come up. just to give you guys an overview of how I'm set up and how I implement these strategies, I trade these CSPs and CCs in 2 tax-sheltered accounts and 1 margin account. I use TradeStation as my platform. They have a number of profiles that you can do when you set the accounts up. I pay a flat dollar per contract in my transactions. It's a penny per share, and then up to 800 shares, and then it falls off less than that as you transact higher. I've written a number of indicators, alerts, and back testing programs. I use something called Portfolio Maestro, and that allows me to validate a lot of the things I'm going to tell you guys. It identifies the stuff that I've written, identifies both stocks as well as option selection. In fact, all the alerts that are echoed out to Twitter are tied into real-time performance and strategies that are running in the background in TradeStation. So I've got that all linked in and is real-time. It's live. So those alerts that are coming through are not, there's no human behind that anymore. I could be anywhere in the country and I get notified just like you do. And I act on it just like you do. The background for this is after paper testing a lot of this in 2017, I jumped in a little over a year and a few months ago, and I'm absolutely pleased with this whole CSP CC strategy thing. My option approval levels are 4 in my tax sheltered accounts, and in my margin accounts 5, although I don't need anywhere near that. You could probably get by with a level 2 or 3. You just need to be able to sell options in a covered sense, and really you don't even have to look at spreads, although some of these may turn into spreads, and that's a different topic for a different time. As I said earlier, I log track everything, and this is the link. I'm not suggesting that you go with this guy. It has errors, and the author is, he's created a great product, fairly expensive, but he's just really slow to fix the errors that I point out to him. I'm probably a squeaky wheel to him by now. He's more focused on futures and stocks than he is options. So let's dive into this, if there's no questions. So I start every day with a daily scan of optional stocks. This is a manual process. I've got a scan that's written to do this, but I have to go and look at those charts and do this. And I don't know if any of you are familiar with Mark Minervini. He's got a pretty solid process for looking at quality stocks, and I use a lot of the learnings that I've gotten from him, his workshops and things like that, to select these stocks. I then look at it by cash secured put. I have a number of criteria that they have to meet. I'm not going to go into that today. That'll be a topic for a later date. But they've got to meet certain return on the accounts, etc. And for the CSP, if I'm assigned, so if the price of the stock has dropped below my put strike, I then turn around and sell a call against that. And this is what I call rinse repeats basis. I also will perhaps sell another put. And there's some criteria on the next chart that'll help us understand that. And like I said, I call this my rinse repeat structure. Yeah, Bruce, I saw that Minervini is going to be in town here in Alexandria on the 26th. I'm going to go to that just to say hi. Bob Wasserman is also his right-hand man, and I've kept in contact with both these guys over the years. So I'm going to go say hi and listen to what Mark's trying to sell, which this is what he's trying to do, is sell access to Minervini private access. I know this is a nice eye chart, but it really encapsulates this whole process of CSPs and CCs. And let me walk you through this because I think it'll be illustrative of what is this strategy, what does it really mean, and how do you do this? And these charts, I refine these charts as I learn little nuances, and I try to keep them fairly simple. Once I walk through this will actually be pretty simple. Start up here in the upper left-hand corner. And like I said, I start with the CSP side, the cash secured put side. And we'll go into why that is here as part of the presentation. So start, and I sell a cash secured put in a good quality stock. And when you do that, you collect a premium that's above some minimum threshold. Remember, I have some criteria for selecting the CSP, and those are based on those alerts that are echoed out to the Twitter sphere. And so we march through time, and once the option expiration gets to us, if the underlying price, the stock price, is below the strike price of the put, then I get assigned, and now I embark down this covered call process. But and if you chose judiciously, I can't say that word this morning, and the option expires worthless, which means that the underlying price is above the put option strike. You collect all the premium. The money is from the cash secured portion is held back in your account or put back in your account, and you do this all over again, back and forth, back and forth. Hang on a second, Sean. I didn't get the person whose criteria you use. His name is Mark Minervini. I'm going to go ahead, and it looks like we've got some notes here. If you wouldn't mind muting your mic, that would be really good. We've got some noise here. I don't want to mute everybody, but I can do that if necessary. Yep, I think you knocked it out, whoever that was. I appreciate that. Yeah, Mark Minervini. And here, I'll just, Mark, Minervini. You can go find him. So that should go out to everybody if you look in your chat window. So thanks for the question, Sean. So cash secured side, it expires worthless. The cash that the brokerage holds is returned to your account. You get the option premium as a profit, and rinse repeat just on this. But if you're assigned, now you're over into the you're holding the stock position, and now if you are holding the stock position, I sell a call at or above the cost basis of the cash secured put. So if you were assigned at $50, for instance, I will sell a call at 50 or above. You collect a premium. If the stock doesn't plunge, then we wait till options expiration, and if it recovers and possibly goes above that, whatever that call strike is, it will get called away, and basically you get your money at the strike price plus the premium you got. And before you know it, now you're back into, sitting on a big cash position, and you get to rinse, repeat that. But if the stock is not called away, and you've got this call sitting out there, it expires worthless. You're still holding the stock position. Is the stock still attractive? So you get to the end of the option expiration. The option expires worthless. Is it still attractive? If it's a good stock, if it hasn't, management hasn't changed, and it hasn't reported a terrible set of earnings or revenue changes on a year-over-year or quarter-over-quarter or trailing 12-month basis, you're in great shape. So if it's still attractive, you just walk right back up here, you sell another call, and you just keep doing this until the stock gets called away. And I try to be as close to being in the money, not in the money, at the money as possible when I'm doing this, as long as it's above the basis that I was originally assigned over here in the put side of the transaction. So you walk through this, and you may get to a point where the stock is not attractive. You've been, for whatever reason, a management change, or you're holding it, and they reported earnings, and they've got a tremendous slowdown that has occurred, either in revenues or in earnings, and before you know it, you say, I just don't know if this thing's gonna recover. And as a result of that, you may want to sell an at-the-money call, which means it's probably below your basis, below what you were assigned, and do it on a pretty short expiration. And you take the loss. You just say, I want to get out of this. Now, the reason you would do this instead of just selling the stock is, why not collect a little bit of premium, right? So you can sell an at-the-money call, which will be a good chunk of change. You'll offset some of your losses. Remember, you got some premium up here too. And, if it's called away, then you're back, starting. You've got to lick your wounds, but as long as this is infrequent, you'll more than likely make up for it. But even if that expires worthless, the stock continues lower, then you can just rinse, repeat this little section here until you get rid of the position, always collecting a little bit of premium. So your takeaway that I want you all to appreciate here is that you should always be collecting premium when you transact a stock. Even if you're not part of this entire CSPCC process, that's as involved as what I've got here. But if you are looking at a long position in a stock, you should absolutely be thinking about how do I collect some premium and lower my basis. And that's what this is all about. And if you're trying to get out of a position, you should be selling the stock or buying, doing some things with options to be able to get some premium here. So I've got this chart actually printed up on my wall, and I look at it often, and I keep iterating it to make it a little more refined. But I think it conveys really this whole strategy in one little chart. So if you've got any questions or comments, and by the way, a copy of this presentation will be available. You can either email me directly or I'll put it in one of the Dropbox folders for you, and you'll have access to it. So you'll be able to print this off and also post it on your wall if necessary. So let's make sure that we're all on the same page with a CSP. So it does two things. It allows me to collect premium, which I just talked about at the time of the sale, and then it obligates me to purchase a stock at the strike price or at a strike price if the underlying closes below that at some time in the future. So I buy something, it's at 54, I sell a option at 50, it closes at 47, the stock's going to be put to me at 50, but I pocketed the premium and now I've got the stock. When a CSP position is sold, this is really important. In an account, when the CSP is sold, the strike price of the contract of the option and the number of contracts is deducted from my cash balance, in addition to a commission. And for today's purposes, I'm going to be ignoring commissions. A couple things happen. So you lose some cash in your account. It's not lost. They are just holding it in escrow. The value that they take out is whatever the option value is, and we'll go into that a little bit more here. And you get some premium that goes back into your account. You can use that right away. That premium is yours, and that's kind of cool if you do a lot of these daily or weekly. So you're actually getting paid, and you get paid immediately for selling these premiums. If the stock is put to me, then the brokerage uses the money that they reserved in that cash balance to offset the shares. So basically, when they put the stock to me, they take the original amount that they set aside, buy the shares, stuff it into my account, and TradeStation has a $14.95 charge if they have to make the assignment or the call if the stock is called away on the CC side. You have an option, no pun intended, to close that option before option's expiration by buying it back, and you'll hear me refer to BTC, buy to close, to remove that obligation. And this could be part of a roll strategy. This could be part of just, I don't want, to either be assigned the stock, or I don't, whatever your decision tree is here. So there's a number of ways to look at that. Paralleling this is the covered call side, right? So in selling a covered call, again, you collect the premium, put it in your pocket, do whatever you want with it. I have to buy at least 100 shares of the stock when I sell the call. So for every contract that I sell, obviously I've got to buy 100 shares, and that's where the name covered comes from. And it obligates me to sell the stock of the call if the stock closes a penny or higher at options expiration. So whereas the CSP was below, this is on the high side, and in that particular case at OE, if the price is above my strike price, the stock is called away. But unlike a CSP, no further cash is deducted because I had to buy it up here. Right? So in the CSP, cash secured, the brokerage sits on your money. Here, you buy the stock, and you're sitting with the stock in your account. And there's a difference there. And that's the whole focus of today. If the covered call is called away, the broker deposits the strike price times the number of contracts over the weekend, less commissions, and away we go. So, this is kind of the overall process of that chart that you just saw. So, Sean, you got a question. When you sell a CSP, how much OTM do I sell? What deltas? I'm typically right around 0.2 on my delta. We're not going to get into deltas today. But that's a great question. I'm usually at the 75% probability of profit at that time, and I'm usually at about 0.2 delta, so fairly out of the money. 3 or 4 strikes away, typically, depending on the thing that I'm looking at. Sure, my pleasure. So when we look at the profit and loss of CCs, and this is where I think basic books on options do somewhat of a disservice to us, especially to new folks, because they don't necessarily tell you all the nuances of what's going on. So I want to start here with, over the trade lifetime, the P&L of CSPs and CCs. So for cash secured puts, I've just drawn basically a chart here that shows the break-even line, 0. We've got some profit that's up here. I've got a strike price for the put. And above the strike price, I basically have no change in my position value. Below the strike price, it rolls off at some value, dollar for dollar or dollar per 100 shares, or however you want to classify that. This first part, because if you can see the plus here and the 0 here, this is the premium I receive when I sell that first put. And so again, I get some amount deposited into my account, whatever that is. I get paid for selling something, so that's kind of cool. And basically what it says is that above that strike price, I get to keep all of the premium. There's no impact on it. But as I get below the strike price, if the underlying starts falling below the strike price, I start in paper. If I were to pull the trigger at any one given moment, up to a point, I'm eating away at the premium I received. And you'll see some examples of that coming up here. Why this is important is that there's a point where the option price is exactly the cost to buy it back is exactly equal to the premium that you received, and that's called your break even. And below that, then you're at a loss, as indicated by the negative here. On the covered call side, it looks exactly the same, doesn't it? So above a call above a certain level, I don't change the position value. Below it, I've got that same roll off. It's at the same slope. I get a premium when I sell the call. I have the same break even. But over the trade lifetime, although they look equivalent, are they really equivalent? What do you guys think? Do you think these two are equivalent over the trade lifetime? Answer, you can post in your chat windows here. All right, nobody's posting in the chat window, so I'm going to tell you. They both have unlimited exposure down to 0. There's no question there. Okay, same P&L, so yes. But is the risk equivalent? What do you think, Sean? I appreciate you interacting there. You're exactly right. They are not. And that's really what we're going to focus on today. So it's really important to understand this risk and this exposure. From a 50,000-foot view, as you just saw, the profit and loss look equivalent, right? So they look exactly the same. And many experts will tell you that a CSP and a CC are interchangeable, so do as you may. And that's why a lot of people, they're used to buying stock long, and they enter it in with a cover call. So I've already got 100 shares of the stock. I might as well go ahead and sell a call against it. I would argue, and I will prove to you today, at least in my poo brain of how I think about things, that your risk profiles are not the same. Risk has to be treated as the analysis of individual positions. I call them risk elements. You can think of them as these obligations to do something. Like, for instance, an obligation to sell at a price. The variance you may see in the account, having the stock position, etc. Different positions with respect to time. So for a cash secured put, I'm the minimum amount is I've got at least one contract that I'm short. And that's it, right? My exposure in this case is just that one contract because the brokerage is holding on to the cash. It's cash secured. It's not equity secured. They didn't buy the shares for me and it's sitting out and I just don't have access to it. They've got my cash and that's it. For a covered call though, they've got, I've got one short contract just like in the CSP and I've got this stock position and that's pretty important. So the risk elements build as the number of positions with exposure change. So just looking at this right here, you can see that CSPs have fewer of these risk elements than a CC because I've got one more thing that I've got that could influence my overall position value. So your exposure may change as a function of time and the vehicle and may be impacted by the price of the underlying. Right? And the magnitude of that is actually called delta, and we're not going to get into delta today because that's a little more advanced. But delta, watching delta, which is the change in underlying, change in value of your account per the change in the underlying, is a pretty important metric. So I want to give you an example of what does this different exposure look like as we move forward here. And so what I've got is a basic timeline here, right? So I've just picked a month in duration. So 215 over here, 315 here, separated by weeks. So let's say on 218, I was to sell one contract in an option. XYZ is the underlying. And it's a put, and the strike is $50. So XYZ, let's just say it's trading on 218 at 54.86 when I pull the trigger here. So when I sell this, the brokerage withdraws 5K. And that 5K is because it's one contract, $50. So 100 shares, $5,000. This becomes cash secured. So the brokerage is sitting, they literally are taking 5K and they're put in escrow for me. And it just sits there. And in this particular case, the account receives some premium for selling this. And I just made this number up, 50. There's no correlation here with the strike price. I just said, okay, basically 1% for a month. And the account receives this $50, which is the 50 cents times 100 shares. All right, so they deposit that immediately. What's the value in the overall account? Well, the value of the cash secured is $5,000 the moment I pull this, right? They took the 5K out and it's sitting in escrow. What's the exposure of that 5K to the market? Zero. Doesn't vary. It's not, nothing changes. Okay, well, that's interesting. Or maybe not. So let's go out a week. And XYZ, our fictitious stock here, drops to $47.24. So we've gone from $54 up here down to $47.24. The option goes up in price. It goes up in price a lot. One, because it now has intrinsic value, and it also has the extrinsic time value. And so the intrinsic value, it's in the money, right? $50. It's at 40. The underline's at 47, so it's $2 and whatever that is, 76 cents in the money, and then there's some time value, so I just rounded it up to 3. Again, I'm just making these numbers up. I have an option, again, no pun intended, but I have a choice whether I want to buy to close the contract. You know, if it's dropped this amount, I want to limit my risk. I want to say, you know what, I just don't like where XYZ is going. And as a result of that, I want to get out. And so if I wanted to buy to close this position on 225, here's what I'm looking at. All right, so the brokerage still has my 5K, but I received this $50. The option value is $3. And so when you net those against, you get, $250 in the hole times 100 shares. It would cost me to close this position on 225, $250. Compared to that, if you just had bought the stock outright at 54 and it falls down, you would actually have a lot less money, and your loss mechanism is much, much higher. So you can see that, options give you the gift of time effectively. In this particular case, the value of the cash secured portion is still 5K. The brokerage is sitting on your cash. It's cash. It's not equity. It doesn't matter. It was not subjected to the drop in the equity price between the 54 to 47. So they're still sitting on this. So the exposure of that is zero. You have to make a decision if you want to get out and remove the obligation that's going to occur at option expiration. Remember, this is a 315 put, which is going to occur out here. This is time. You have to make a decision whether you want to just close that option leg and not have to worry about it. So let's say, nah, I'm going to hold on to it. So I'm just going to continue on. We go another month or another week here. So we're on 3-6 here. XYZ recovers from 47 up to 50.19. Remember, my put has a strike of 50, and now I'm a little bit above that. So I'm not in the money. I'm out of the money, or at the money. I'm above, though, right? So basically, I've got a value of 25 cents. And you're saying, whew, I escaped that bullet. Get me out before, I'm too close, and I want to get out. So what's the cost to get out, to buy to close the BTC here? I receive the 50. I subtract the 25 of what this thing's going to cost, right? And I get a credit overall. I'll walk away with a slight positive credit. And that's not a bad thing, right? But if you look at this, if you were to execute this, the value of your cash secured is still $5,000. So they would put $5,000 back in your account, and you would actually net out of the entire transaction, the entire leg, you would net $25, not including commissions out of this. The exposure in this particular case was still zero. So you can see 0, 0, 0 all throughout this year. $5,000 is constant, and you are in decision-making process of whether you want to exit at a loss or exit at a slight gain. Doesn't really matter. But let's say you say, no, I'm just going to hold this thing all the way to option expiration because I feel that we're going to close above, but it doesn't. It closes at 47.57, so it goes back down. Again, I'm just making this stuff up. Because it's below 50, which was your put strike, you're assigned, the brokerage takes that original $5,000 that it had over here, and it purchases 100 shares for you. 100 times $50, right? Because it was $50 strike, and boom, there's that $5,000. And then, of course, they subtract their commissions out of your account, but I'm ignoring that for all intents and purposes. So what, in this particular case, what's my exposure? Well, you don't have any cash secured anymore. Your exposure is 47.57, right? Because now you're holding 100 shares of this thing. It's worth 47.57. That Monday morning when you walk in and at 9:30 a.m. Monday morning Eastern time, you're looking at an exposure. This is what you could get for that transaction if you were to trade it immediately on the market. Your paper loss is 243. That's whatever it would net you to get back up to 50, offset by you receive some premium, so we add that back in here. So you're actually only down 193 in paper loss. Remember, paper loss. The key here, though, that I think you want to appreciate is you had zero exposure here, zero exposure here, zero exposure here. You had a wild ride of prices. Only when you held the stock was when you started getting the true exposure of what that means. So from this point forward, from 315 onward, actually 318, right? It'll be the Monday following the option expiration, is when you start really, you're holding the stock and you're moving around now. So that's pretty important. So I want you to internalize this. Let's look at this from the perspective of the CC. Same thing. Except I've got a call 52.5, and I'm going to say XYZ is at 50, just to keep the numbers simple here. Again, they take $5,000 from my account and they purchase 100 shares. So now I'm holding on to 100 shares. I also, because I sell one contract against that 100 shares, I get my $50 premium. I just kept the numbers the same as you saw earlier. So the value of the stock, the minute I transaction, the second, the tick after this, the value of the stock is $5,000. And the exposure that I have is 5K. Note how different that is from that. Right? Let's take a look at that. Here my exposures were 0. Now my exposure is 5K because I hold that long position. Same drill here. We go out to 225, stock drops to 47.24. That's actually a good thing because in a covered call, as we move away from the call strike, we actually, we're moving towards that thing decreasing in value. It was 50 cents. Now it's 25 cents. And if I say, listen, I'm just going to exit out of this thing, what the heck? So we get out of it. I'm still going to get my $25 credit, but I still own the stock. Right? I still own the stock, and now I bought at 50 because the strike fell to 47.24. This is my exposure. I'm exposed to the market. My account balance is $4,700, and I get a credit if I pull the trigger to BTC. I get my $25 here. This is your choice. You don't have a choice. This is a market choice. Right? So your exposure is out of your control. It's because you hold the shares. Again, contrast that with this, where you had 0, right? 0 exposure during all those market gyrations. That's important. So you say, no, I'm going to hold on to this thing. I'm going to hold on to my contract. And now we get up here, and the price rises to 53.19. I'm above my call strike of 52.5. The price goes up, and you say, listen, you know what? I'm holding 100 shares of this thing at 50, and the price is already at 53. This thing's on a wild ride. It's taken off like a rocket, but I'm limited. Remember what the profile looked like, right? Above the strike, a call strike, I'm flat in my risk, my total P&L. Remember that chart from before? So you say, you know what? I want to get out of this thing. Because this thing's going to the moon, and I don't want to be limited. I don't want this thing called away. So what's my cost? My cost is exactly as I delineate out here, right? It's $40. That's what the entire leg will end up costing me because it's going to be netted against the 50 cents here. It costs 90 as it goes up. It's above 53.9. You see how that number works. All right. So the value of the stock held is 53.19, and my exposure is all of that after I get done doing this, right? So that's a good thing. Not necessarily a good thing, but you can see, you're rising in value. You decided to close the position. It cost you $40, but your exposure is whatever for that 100 shares is how your position is actually going to change. But let's say you're like me, and I typically don't roll out if I don't have to. Because obviously you would take a loss on this leg, maybe for the gain here, maybe not. You saw how this is down, up. Stock closes at 51, at the end of options expiration. So it's below my call strike. It expires worthless. I keep the original 50 cents over here. So I keep that $50 premium. The value of the account has appreciated $1 per share. So now I've removed my obligation because it expired worthless. I bought at 50. It closes at 51. I've got a long position that's appreciated $1 per share. So now I'm holding on to something that's at $5,100. So I would argue the point that I want you to come away with is that risk and exposure are different in a CSP than a CC. You are exposed very differently throughout the life cycle of a CC, whereas in a CSP, as we saw earlier, your only influence is the influence of the stock price on the option contract. Your original cash secured is this. That's why, let me just back up here, that's why I start with the CSP in all of this. I think the CSP gives us less exposure to the market and market variations. So there was one of the forums, just covered trade forums, I got challenged on why, a CSP and a CC are to be considered different, especially when the P&L profiles are equivalent. And it's for this reason, and it's not a simple answer, which is why I didn't respond in that forum, because this is obviously a fairly complicated thing. So all I did here is I was advancing slides. I didn't want to get you there. So let's look at what we've got here. So for a cash secured put, premium is never at risk. It's yours to keep. And that's the same thing on a covered call. So color those green. Because you're not holding stock in a cash secured put, the brokerage has your cash. You don't have it. It's an escrow. Exposure remains constant and zero if prior to option expiration. Because you're holding the stock in a covered call, your exposure varies on a tick-by-tick basis and varies one-to-one to the share price of the underlying. So that's a huge risk element that differs from your cash secured put. Once the non-zero price of the underlying has been established, so it's not zero, right? So it's gone down or it's gone up. The only risk element that we have when a cash secured put is the variance on the option price. That's the only thing I have to worry about. Whereas over here in a covered call, once I have a price, whatever it is, above or below my strike, the additional risk element, in addition to what you see over here, is the variance of the stock price. That's what adds more risk to a covered call position compared to a cash secured put position. So in the CSP, either one of these will occur. If it's assigned, you now will have the stock, and it will basically be one-to-one. If it's never assigned because the option is worthless, then the full amount of the cash secured amount is returned to you. So in those original examples, we were using $50. So it's a $5,000 return to your account. And your total exposure once the option expires worthless is zero. Whereas at the end of the contract, when in a covered call, even if it expires worthless, the contract expires worthless, you are still at the mercy of whatever the market is doing. And I think that's the important thing to take away. So let me pause there before we go on to this next thing. Are there any questions or comments so far? Is this useful? Is this not useful? Do you understand basically what I'm driving at here, and how we could use this in our favor? You can use your chat window, or you can talk, whatever's easiest for you guys. Okay, good. Thanks, Bruce. At least a few of you are interacting, and I appreciate that. It takes a while to put this stuff together. So let's go through a real world example here, so you can kind of see it. So this is the trade station when you open up the option module. You have the ability to look at P&L. So this is I'm looking at the CSP here, and I'm short at least one contract, and this is Old Dominion Freight Lines, and the let's just presume that the strike, the price, is 141.75. Let's say I sell a put out here at 135, and if you look here, so we've got the blue line, which is the equity line at option expiration, and the knee point right here is right at 135. That's what this indicates right here, and I'm before my options expiration. So before option expiration, if the underlying which is at this 141.75, starts moving towards some other value here, right? So now we've gone from here to here, and I'm moving towards my put strike. As we march through time, if the price of the underlying drops towards, our exposure is only the cost to buy back the option. So my exposure, so this is the time value right here. That's why you have a curve on these charts. Basically, this is at option expiration, and this is what the value is at the moment in time you're looking at the chart. So it represents the time value. And so your cost, your exposure, if you want to close this contract, just like what we did before, the price has fallen, you would have to pay this. Now, I don't know if you can see it on this chart easily. I can see now that maybe black is not showing up as well as it should for you. If you're above the zero line here, then you'll make some profit. But if you're below the zero line, so that break-even point's right here, and then everything below this is your cost. That's your exposure, and you'll probably have a loss. So if you choose, as the price falls towards this or even beyond this, if you choose to close this position, your exposure is the cost of that position. But remember, your original amount of money, in this case $13,412, which is being held in escrow by your brokerage account, doesn't change. You're going to get that money back. You're going to get that $13,412 back, independent of what happens here. Of course, I'm ignoring commissions, but you get the idea. All right. So the cash portion reserved by the brokerage remains intact. That $13,412 doesn't change. You, the account holder, are in control. You don't care about, the market's not swinging your account around. You are basically making a decision. Do you want this option to get out of the obligation or not? And so that you're incurring this exposure, and that's it. So your exposure is only the cost to buy back the option before option expiration, less any premium that you received. From in this particular case, you got a little bit of premium there. Still a CSP, Old Dominion. Let's say the price drops deeply into the money, right? ITM in the money. The put strike is at 135, and my current is well below this. So here's 135. I've fallen below, and now you can see, here's my profit, and now I'm really starting to fall off here. So my exposure, right, as this thing goes down, and this is why I think some people say that the P&Ls are equivalent between a CC and a CSP, is they look the same, but how you treat them is very, very different, as I've established. So your exposure, as this thing gets down here and starts moving to the left, now starts becoming palatable, right? Now it's you can visualize what your loss is going to be. You're going to, even with some gains that you got in the premium here, it doesn't matter. At the end of the day, you've got to make a decision. Now, you are in control. Even though the price has fallen a lot, you still are basically in control of the money. So the risk of early assignment gets bigger, right? You may be forced into the position before OE, and the further in the money this becomes, and that's a new risk that starts developing. But the original amount held by the brokerage is intact. The amount that they set aside, that $13,412, is still sitting there, right? So the exposure is the cost to buy the option to close if you decide to do this. If you decide to do this. The market's not deciding anything right now. You are in control of this, and I think that's why I like the CSP approach. So your exposure here in this case is twofold. The cost to buy back the option before option expiration, less any premium, and it's the risk of that early assignment, and that's it. So the CSP, if the price closes above the 135, which was our strike, it expires worthless. So if the price is anywhere in here, all the premium collected, that's this amount that's between the zero line and this line, is yours. And if it expires worthless, or not, it will expire worthless. And in this particular case, all of that $13,412 will be returned to your account. So you are completely intact. Now you lost, perhaps you lost out on the profit potential being up here, but you also saved yourself. There's no exposure in this particular case. And then finally, if the price closes anywhere below this, at option expiration, you will be assigned, right? Because the price is below where your knee point is. That's 135. You've gone from, where you, could have looked at the stock at the 141 down here much lower. You will be assigned at 135 though, and your paper loss is the magnitude between your break even and wherever it is trading, at that particular part of the day. So now what's really important is that you now have stock ownership once this thing is assigned to you, and your exposure is non-zero. So again, 000 up until options expiration in those different cases that I presented earlier. But once you hit options expiration and you are now holding the stock, now your exposure goes to the full amount. So just to make sure this is clear for everybody, if the stock price is above the strike, the exposure is the cost to buy the contract and close it, and that's it. The cost may be some or all of your received premium. That's a choice you make, though, right? The original cash amount reserved and held by the brokerage remains intact. Exposure is only the cost of the contract to close. That's it. That's all you are at risk. You don't care what the stock price is doing, although it influences the overall premium and the overall amount that the option is worth. But at the end of the day, you still will come out ahead compared to pure stock ownership. And then if the stock price is below the strike, you're going to get assigned, right? Or before option expiration, excuse me. You risk early assignment that the brokerage could actually assign this thing to you. And now you're at a loss, right? Now you're at this point. And you have to make a decision whether or not to buy that option back at most likely at a loss. So at option expiration, you're above the strike, celebrate, right? So basically the option's going to expire worthless, money's going to put in your account, and the brokerage, which was holding on to your money in escrow, is going to deposit that back to your account. You're in great shape, and now you can rinse, repeat, just like those charts we had before. But if it's below, you're going to get assigned, and now your exposure is non-zero. Now your exposure is the value of those stocks. And your paper loss, if you need to exit, is the difference between the strike, that's important, right? It's the strike, the 135, and where you are now in that overall process. Okay. I got a question here. Let's see what the question is. Psychologically, I feel comfortable at holding a stock as something tangible. I know I'm wrong in thinking that CSP is more risky. It is not. But once you buy the stock, the risk that exists appears to have gone as you have already got the stock. How screwed up is my psychology? Is it the same for everybody? I'm not laughing at you, Sean. I'm laughing because it's not screwed up psychology at all. You're right. You're holding the tangible stock in when you have a covered call. There's no question, right? You're long the stock, and you've got it in your hand. But remember, now you've got the stock, and you don't have any time, right? There's another way to look at this. Remember Steve Wynn? WYNN, the gambling mogul in Las Vegas. The price of Wynn, WYNN, was pretty elevated. He got popped overnight for accused of stuff. He eventually led to his having to step aside as chairman of his group that he founded. The stock went 30% down overnight. If you're a stock holder and the stock drops 30%, you could be screwed, right? I mean, you've got the money, or you've got the stock in your possession. Your account balance just took a 30% hit for that, that ownership. If I had an option, and let's say the options, I've got 2 months left on the option, or I've got a month left on the option. If you don't panic, the value of the options obviously in the money and you're going to get hammered. But if I'm not holding the stock, I've got the gift of time. I get the irrational behavior of the market out of it. And I make the decision whether or not I want to close that contract or not. So I don't think you're screwed up in your psychology, but I think your risk profile you need to think about the risk profile. If I have the gift of time because I'm using options, I have less risk because time actually removes emotion from the marketplace. So I want you to think about that as you go forward. Holding the tangible stock, if you get all the other benefits, remember, let me just reiterate something here. In both of these cases, you get the premium, right? So either way, you're going to get paid for selling something. But now because you're holding the stock on the covered call side, you're subjected to a one-to-one movement in stock price. Your portfolio value is going to go up or down tick by tick, whereas over here, not so, or not nearly as sensitive because of delta. So your exposure is a heck of a lot less on the cash secured put. In fact, if your delta is 0.2, that's 20%. You're only going to, for a dollar change that you would have over here, you're only going to see 20 cents change here. Maybe I should have gone into delta today because I think that illustrates the point. So, I understand your question. I would not latch on to the psychology of holding the stock being less risky. It's not. Your exposure is higher. Now, you may want to have other reasons for holding the stock, dividend payments, things like that. But that's different. Those are economic decisions. Your exposure, which is what I'm trying, your risk, your exposure on the covered call is higher than it is on the cash secured put, especially for exogenous events like I just described with Steve Wynn. And you can think of, I guess, stamps would be, this week they went down 30% also, right? Okay. So let me finish this up and then we'll go into questions here. So in this particular case, let's see if I can hear it. So as we march through time, okay, so this is the covered call side. Again, I'm at 141.75. I bought the covered call, which means I bought stock at 144, and I sold simultaneously the 145 strike, so slightly out of the money. And that's what you see here is I've got this 145 knee point right here, and I'm at 141.75, and my break even is right here at 144 and change. Okay. So as we march through time towards options expiration, if the price of the underlying moves towards the strike, one risk component is the cost to buy back the option. And you can see as I move this way from here to here, my exposure is exactly what you see here, right? But this isn't necessarily bad. I'm moving higher in price, and that's always, we always want to move higher in price if we're long a stock position. But there's a challenge with that. What happens is that once you become in the money, so here's that 145, and that was the call strike. Once you go above that call strike, remember, you're capped in your profit potential on a covered call. But if you want to exit out at that point and just say, no, this thing's going to the moon, your cost to close that option position increases the higher the stock goes. And we went through the math on a previous screen. Because the call is in the money and has intrinsic value, the cost of buying the open call to close continues to rise as the stock price rises. That's a risk. All right. Now it's a good thing, right? Because now you're above 145. You bought at 144. You're making money. This is good. This isn't a bad thing. You do, though, have a risk element of being called away, and I think that's important to appreciate and to understand. The higher in the money you become, the brokerage may basically call you away early and just deposit your 145 back in your account. You'll still make money, but you're not going to be able to participate in all this. So you've got to make a decision. If you're deep in the money, do I want to close this obligation? So this is the whole strategy behind rolling. And like I said, I'm going to tackle that in a couple months with a pretty in-depth presentation. So if at option expiration the underlying is above the strike, so here's the 145 mark, where we close anywhere. We are called away at 145. That's why this is a flat line right here. We pocket all of the premium we receive, which is the difference between this flat line and the zero line. We basically, in this particular case, we get a $100 profit in this instance, because we basically we bought at 144. It was called away at 145, and so we were capped at that. So that's not a bad thing, right? So this, I actually think, is a successful trade or a successful cycle, and you can always do things with them. On the flip side, if you are holding the position and it closes below at options expiration, this is pretty important, the option expires worthless. You pocket all the premium, which is really cool. You get that, what you originally received. If it's here and you bought at 144, you get a small paper profit if the price is above the long entry 144, but below the strike of 145. That's where that knee point is. But you get a paper loss if you're below the long entry of 144. And as a result of this, the exposure becomes your stock price times the number of shares. And the more this falls, the greater your exposure, right? So you may be still holding the stock. You got your little premium bump here, but you're toast, right? You're here. And now you're going to be selling, if it's below 144, you're going to be selling at a loss. So this is just like the CSP chart. So before option expiration, you've got exposure on 2 points. You've got the cost to buy the contract if you want to get out of it, and the variance in portfolio value due to change in stock price. You are long 100 shares, minimum 100 shares. Therefore, your exposure is different. You didn't have this in the cash secured put. If the stock price is above, you risk early assignment, and the cost of buying back the option increases as the stock price moves higher and higher and higher away from your strike. And that can really mess with you and limit your overall gains. And then after, or I should say at option expiration, if the stock price is above, again, I want you to celebrate. This is a perfect outcome. Your stock is going to basically be called away. You basically have gone full cycle here in this whole rinse repeats thing that I have. You get the profit from the premium received, and you get profit from the difference of the long entry to the call strike. And this, to me, is the way I love to see the covered calls end up. But if the stock price is below, the option expires worthless, and although you keep all of the option premium, which is a good thing, you now still have the option, or you have the 100 shares of minimum 100 shares of stock. And if it's fallen a lot, as we just saw here, you could be deeply underwater, right? So you've got to figure out when to unload that. You didn't have to make that decision when you were doing the cash secured put. So that's the end of my prepared stuff. I'm happy to take questions and whatever is useful for folks. I was going to just walk through a little bit of my TradeStation stuff, just so you can get a taste of what some of the things that I've got with TradeStation, and happy to do that here. But before we do that, are there questions? And let me go back to the chat window here and see what we've got from folks. Would I consider options further out in time less risky? Is there a optimum time? This is a great question, and here's why it's a great question. I was taught long ago that time is valuable because time is a smoothing function on market emotions. I think it's a double-edged sword. What I have learned, Sean, is this. Time will take the emotion of exogenous events, kind of like that Steve Wynn thing that I was talking about earlier. They will take it out of consideration for you and actually probably mitigate some of your losses. The knee-jerk responses to huge stock price fluctuations. The flip side of it is that sometimes long contracts, option contracts that are really far out, 1 month, 2 months, 8 months, 9 months, like leaps. There are places for those. There's no question that selling a leap, for instance, can be a great strategy as a proxy for owning stock. The challenge is you now are locked into a pretty long time, and for a cash secured put, that money is tied up. And so this whole thing goes against I am trying to get 18% annualized true return in my account. So because time is a double-edged sword, it can work for you for those exogenous events, but it can also work against you in that you may not be able to utilize that money to get your premium goals, to get your annualized rate of return goals. So what I mean is that that 50 cents that I was getting for selling that $50 put strike, that 50 strike, over 1 month, simple math, 1 month, 1% times 12, simple math, 12%. If that were a 3-month contract, that's 1% over 3 months. I've now reduced my ability to get 18%, or in this case, even 12%, on that position because that money is being held by the brokerage. It's not working for you. So there's a trade-off to be made between option duration, time, and goals that you may have for option return, turnover. The greater the turnover in your account, the greater your chances are of hitting your performance goals. But because of that shorter time frame, so if I go from, say, a quarterly option to a monthly option, you got to give something up. You don't get something for free here. And what you give up is that if an exogenous event occurs, you give up the ability to have time smooth emotion from the account. So if I go from a monthly to a weekly, and that Steve Wynn thing happened where the stock falls 30%, chances are if I'm in a weekly, I'm not even sure Wynn has weeklies, but if I were in a weekly with Wynn, probably I'm screwed. I'm probably going to get assigned at 150 and the stock's at 120 at the end of that week. And there's not much I can do about it, right? So I'm going to have a $30 paper loss in that example that I just gave. So there's a balance. So this is why quality stocks really matter. You don't want stocks that are going to be all over the map. And you want good management, you want good earnings, you want good revenues, and you want the likelihood of exogenous events to influence you. Hope that answers your question. If not, just go ahead and post something else. Any other questions? All right, so let me do this. I'm going to change some things around here. Your screen's going to flash here while I change over to monitor 2. And let me move this over here. Okay. Let me grab this and pull this over here. All right. So what could we do here for a little bit of time? I know we're an hour and 17 into this, so I'll take a little bit of time here and show you a few things of how I'm looking at what I do. So as I said, I've created, let me move this chat window out of the way here. Okay. Can everybody see that? Can you see this? Oh, is there an optimum time? To hit your performance goals, I like weeklies. If you're investing in quality stocks, then I think the ability to use weeklies is greatly enhanced. The more volatile your stock, most likely the longer you'll probably want to go with monthlies. There's a number of considerations in that, but I tend to do both weeklies, and I'll show you that here in a little bit, as well as monthlies. So I run a scanner, like I said, and every day at the close of markets, I'm looking for criteria, and you can see this thing just runs automatically at 4:35 Eastern Time every day, and it generates a list for me. And the list of stocks that it generates basically have criteria that I'm looking for. They all have positive year-over-year EPS, free cash flow. Basically, they have to be optional, so they have to have specific open interest. They have to have positive year-over-year revenues and things. In fact, let me just open this up so you can see how this works. And I'm happy to share this with you. So I'm looking for positive, optional. Free cash flow means they're able to, they've got discretionary spending that they can do to either hire, expand production, all sorts of things. So if you're not familiar with free cash flow, I urge you to go look at it. TTM is trailing 12 months. MRQ is the most recent quarter. YOY is year over year. So basically, these are the three things that I'm looking for. So I'm looking for gains that are all positive in different time frames. I also look for, so in this particular case, I'm rejecting ETFs. That's TradeStation's way of classifying an ETF. Most ETFs all fall in this miscellaneous financial services category. I also have a scoring mechanism that I put in there, so I'm looking for moving averages. I want these things to be in an uptrend, and so if they're in this uptrend, I've written an indicator that basically helps me figure that out. I'm also looking for volume that's fairly substantial. I want 3-month volume to be solid, and I also want 10-day volume to be solid. Kind of subjective in that, but at the end of the day, I get this list. And you can see that stocks get added to the list as we report earnings or as they do, and then some stocks have fallen off the list for whatever reason. It could be a number of the criteria that I just showed you. Whatever the case may be, it doesn't matter. Then I start looking, I do what's called a multi-time frame analysis, and I'm looking for when stocks are falling out of favor as well as when they fall in favor or when they come into favor. So these are stocks that, if we were just to click through some of these, have taken a hit. But they've been in a good uptrend. Now they're starting to consolidate a little bit, but you can see that while they were in the trend and now they're out of the trend, they've met some criteria. I won't go into the details of what all the criteria is, but I will say the ones that are in a bull criteria, the 1-1 and 1+1 here, you can see when you look at the charts, they're starting to break out and hit new 52-week highs. And typically, my stock selection incorporates these and it pulls these in. And this is what you get alerted on every single day. So Friday was actually a pretty good day for new generation. In fact, these are generating new daily signals just for whatever and for whatever reason. And you can see a lot of these stocks are looking, really, really solid. They've had a good run here. This red line is the new 52-week high, and they've got some Darvas boxes that were, here's an initial signal that would have been caught by my system and, would have broke out really, really well. Anyways, And so selling CSPs on stocks that are doing this, especially when they break out of the Darvas box like this, your chances are they're going to expire worthless. And I keep track of all of that. And so that's part of what I do here is that the quality of these stocks, again, since I focus starting on CSPs, even if they were to pull back, and you can see there are different levels here of when these things could actually trigger and come in. These are all pretty darn good looking stocks. Boy, that had a huge run on that. Look at that. Look at that change in price. My goodness. You must have had earnings, re-signaled another, looks like we had a pullback here and then boom, it took off. Oh, anyways, you see what I'm doing. Anyways, so we have this. They're all trading very strong. You don't see any bottom fishes here. In fact, this is the trailing 52-week low here. And the different moving averages, you can see everything is trending up. So the slopes on the moving averages are all trending up. They're all creating new Darvas boxes. They're hitting new 52-week highs, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So I do that. I also look at ETFs. What are the strongest ETFs that I'm seeing that are optionable? You will not see these necessarily in the alerts. But I do look at this list and I do independently, pull from these things. So what? So this all gets fed into a system. I have not updated it for next week. So the dates here will be, a little bit off, meaning I haven't updated way far out, but now to your question, Sean, about weeklies versus monthlies. And so when you look at the GGT alerts that are being generated, this would have generated an alert. This is Monster. And basically this is saying MNST, I think is Monster. Let's go take a look here real quick. Bear with me here, folks. Yeah, I think that's it. No? I blew it. MNST, where are we? Yeah, MNST. Oh, it doesn't tell me. Yeah, I think MNST is Monster. Anyways, this is in alert status. In fact, it'll continue into Monday morning. Microsoft, ULTA, etc. So these are basically the options that the scanner at 4 p.m. Friday was looking at, and this is the last status. So I populated from those scan lists, I populated these new lists, and I do this every day, and it's separated by options. I put it in different lists. I could do it all in one list, but it's better for me to look at both the date, so this is March 1st, on both the CSP side, but I also do this for the covered call side. In fact, let me see if I can get this to refresh. There we go. So basically, there's a covered call also on MNST, but I also realize it's got earnings release next week on February 27th, which is why it's probably burning hot. In fact, the IV rank is 90%, and that's why it's alerting, because there's a lot of activity that is going on. This is a huge amount of premium, 72% probability that it's going to be out of the money, but not necessarily a guarantee. If I were to collect 55% on this, that's a return of 0.7% on the option and a 31% annualized if I were to sell this contract and collect 55 cents on Monday morning. So this will alert Monday morning, and this is basically what I'm looking at in context of if I were to get into MNST Monday, this is what I'd be looking at. The thing that would preclude me from getting into to Monster on Monday morning is the fact that it's got earnings released next week, and so it can go either way, and it's probably not a good thing. I have no idea what the overall for Monster is, but one thing that I can do that I do in the background for you guys is I always screen these stocks prior to, yeah, and it's got great revenues. It's got great EPS. In fact, it's looking phenomenal. So then I would go to Whispers, earningswhisper.com, and I would check to see where it was at. So anyways, so I go through and I do this on weeklies, and then I also do this for, let me refresh this, for whatever reason it reset when we were talking. All right, so I'm just going to reset these so you can get a clean view here. So this was for Friday. I haven't gone in and reset these, but basically this is looking at March 15th, and these are puts, right? So that's what the P is there, of course. And you can see that I don't have any alerts that are being generated, and that's because I'm not meeting certain criteria out here. But when an alert is generated for the March put side, it would basically go out to Twitter, and you guys would see that. Same thing here on the call side for March. And I will update these lists before Monday morning, of course. The key here, though, is that if we see anything that's highlighted here, it's obviously telling us that we should look a little closer. Like I said, MNST is one of these things. So for example, let me just grab, just so you can see how this works for me. If I go grab, bear with me here, guys. Go over here to scanner, and I'm just going to grab all of these just as an example. I know they're all good stocks, and I'm just going to stuff them into, say, the March window here. Let's see what they look like. So this is the March puts. So what it's doing right now, it's going out and it's scanning the option chains for this, and it's coming up with a number of calculations to see if anything here hits. It's not able to get good calculations on these two for whatever reason, but nothing alerts yet. If we pull in a little closer, I don't know how many of these things are actually weeklies. It will tell us here in a minute. Let me refresh these. Very few of these are actually weeklies. Here's one. So let me get rid of those. So TTD is a weekly. So Sean, to your earlier question, so I've got an alert that's formed on TTD for March 1st. It just had earnings. This is actually a great candidate for a call, selling a covered call on. The call is at 210. Its last price was 197. So although I don't start with covered calls, I may be opportunistic in something like this. So my annualized, if I were to get $1.45 by selling the March 1st call, so I would put an order in this particular case on TTD to sell the March the March 1st 210. I'm beyond earnings, so I don't have that exogenous thing happening. I've got pretty good IVR, although it's dropping, it looks like. But collecting, you can see actually a pretty good spread here. So if I collect 145 on that thing, I'll return 29% annualized between now and March 1st. And that's a pretty good return, right? I mean, for a covered call. So if you think the stock, I'm going to take a look at TED here. Let's go back over here and just, well, this is why. So this is actually interesting. So when you see this gap up like this, and then yeah, it's kind of interesting. So we could actually sell the 210 call, enter in at 197. So the question that you would have to ask yourself, yeah, I can get all that premium, but and have it expire worthless. But that's not what I want for a covered call. Remember our chart. We actually want the covered call to be called away, right? So remember, you want this thing to get called away so you can rinse repeat back up here, right? So if you jumped in midstream here, you might be stuck holding because this thing, you got this gap. There's a gap fill there, right? That probably will occur. But this is a great stock, but something obviously caused this to occur. Earnings caused this to occur, whatever the case may be. So anyways, would I sell that covered call? Probably not, but yeah, something to think about. So, so we're at an hour and a half here. I just want to give you a taste of how this process works for me. These things that are highlighted here get echoed out to Twitter sphere. So for instance, if we were to take a look literally here, the tweets that are coming out here are exactly what you just saw, and it's got all that information that I was just showing you. And these are the ones that, actually just get rolled out, and I occasionally post out here. So Monday morning, you will see if this is still valid at the open. You'll see TTD appear as an alert. It's beyond earnings, but it's probably going to pull back, and you're going to be stuck with the stock. So I would give it the gift of time. Maybe take a look at others that are a little better. So anyways, I hope this was useful. I appreciate everybody, hanging in there, and I appreciate the questions and your attentiveness here. So don't hesitate to reach out to me if you're interested in basically getting this information. You can reach me, like I said. You can text me. Prefer you not call unless you want to. I typically don't pick up on numbers I don't know who they are until you leave a voicemail. But texting is always a good thing. This email is great. Will always work, and of course I'll post this in the Yahoo group, and we'll go from there. So with that, enjoy your weekend. Make it a great one, and I thank everybody for your time, and if you got any questions, don't hesitate to ask. So take care, everyone. Bye-bye.